Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Monday, January the 19th. Yet another day when we won't be talking about the cost of living. After ripping up his plans for today, this morning, likely around 9:15am, Keir Starmer is holding an emergency press conference in Downing Street. The trigger: crisis in NATO and the worst transatlantic relations in decades as Donald Trump unbound causes havoc amongst allies. This morning, we discuss what Keir Starmer will do next and how his government sees it. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy of Politico from Davos, where it's -5 degrees this morning, roughly the temperature of transatlantic diplomatic relations right now, as politicians from around the globe descend on the Swiss Alpine resort to try to deal with the unfolding crisis.
You are in the place where it matters, Anne. A town braced for the arrival of Donald Trump and a large business delegation. I can see a world in which Keir Starmer rips up his plans for a second time and actually decides that he can't be one of the few G7 leaders not in the Swiss Alpine resort and turns up as well. Can you just paint a picture of what it's like for everyone listening who has never been to this exclusive business summit, beloved of politicians?
Well, you better get here fast, Sam, because it's absolutely heaving with global politicians and business A-listers. So in a nutshell, Davos, Europe's highest town, fun fact, 1,500 metres above sea level, and the setting for Thomas Mann's great novel, The Magic Mountain, about Europe descending into war and cultural chaos in the early 20th century. Well, some resonances abound on that one this year, and it's just a mixture of raw power play on the main stage in the Congress Hall, where those A-listers of politics, business, technology, etc., lay out their talking points for the week. And then in the evenings, it's parties. It's as much fondue as you can eat, dinners and events. One big addition that's quite telling this year is this massive USA Davos House pop-up, hosting its own sessions with people they want to invite, very much sort of led by the Trump team, and so oversubscribed that there's been a black market in VIP passes to get in and a scam to get people to pay for it. So you'll be happy to know that this salmon and VIP pass is there for free.
Good to know. Good to have you there. Let's get back on track. We're at a point of major diplomatic crisis. There's no two ways around it, with Trump at the centre of it, who is, of course, heading to where you are right now. Being at the centre of a crisis is exactly what Trump likes. Should we start just by setting out what's happening?
Well, the first anyone knew of a really big problem was on Sunday morning when Donald Trump took, as he does, to Truth Social and escalated the row over who owns Greenland. In 13 days' time, he wrote, he would impose a 10% tariff on goods from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Finland, and the UK. And that comes after all of these countries, of course, including Britain, sent military figures to Greenland to discuss Arctic security. And that move caused a further freeze with the White House, who saw it as a provocation. The tariffs, Trump says, will all come into force on February the 1st, but they will later rise in June to 25% and last until a deal is reached. So a real forcing move there by the president.
It's important to remind listeners that Britain sent a single military officer to Greenland last week, a huge price we're about to pay for one individual going as part of that allies' mission. But now we're in a situation where our supposed closest ally is threatening to harm our economy once again. And to deal with this, yesterday, Sunday, Keir Starmer hit the phone speaking to the Prime Minister of Denmark, President of the European Commission, NATO Secretary General, and then he spoke to President Trump. And what he did then was, we are told, because we never hear the call, but in the briefing, some of the bluntest remarks we've ever been told by Number 10 about a call with the White House. Keir Starmer told the US president it was wrong to threaten a 10% tariff on allies simply because they're pursuing the collective security of NATO.
So the question here, as the leaders roll up in their photo-friendly padded jackets, is can they use this pivotal gathering to lock arms and to get an irate Donald Trump to back down? So on the UK side, we've got Rachel Reeves and Peter Kyle here touting for UK business, and most G7 leaders in attendance. There was almost like parallel Davos is somewhere you have the business one, but the geopolitics, as you point out, are really already taking over. We will have national security advisors meeting here in the afternoon. Initially, they were supposed to be focusing on Ukraine, which likes to see itself at the heart of Davos. But these days, it's just been overhauled in time to discuss the crisis over Greenland. So we're seeing pivots happen. And I've not really ever seen this, I must say, at Davos in real time. That was where you start at the beginning of the week looks like it could end up in a very different place to anything that's on the formal agenda.
I wonder if amongst those national security advisors is Jonathan Powell, Keir Starmer's guy. We'll find out, no doubt, in the next few hours. And that's one of the reasons I think Keir Starmer might end up going, although Downing Street don't say that's the plan at the moment. So quite obviously, that's the main story that we're going to be talking about and coming back to in just a moment. But there is so much else besides. So before we get into that, I just want to draw your attention to one other big thing. It's something that listeners to this podcast will be a bit familiar with from what we were talking about last week, but it's a huge litmus test of the government's ability to get things done. Because after 10 o'clock last night, the government whips pulled this bill, the Hillsborough Law, from the Commons this afternoon. Things inside government are not strong and stable. I got because of the timing. I got a tip off after 10 o'clock on Sunday night that this dramatic move had happened. Now, this is the bill that puts a duty of candour and disclosure on public officials in the attempt to stop future cover-ups like the one in Hillsborough. But they're pulling it for the second time in a week. And that's because there were huge negotiations about what should go in it. Families, campaigns, ministers, Labour MPs, all at these negotiations at the weekend, and they just couldn't get a deal. And one government person called pulling of this bill absolutely mental.
That is a real running sore. And a quick kudos to you, Sam, because you've been talking about this every day for a week. Also, when it seemed that it was one of those topics highlighted at party conference by Keir Starmer, yes, but it felt like it had gone quiet. Well, I think we probably know now why, because it has clearly ended up in quite a mess for the government and an emotional topic for Labour, especially in the Northwest. But it was the Prime Minister who chose to open conference flanked by a relative of a Hillsborough victim, and also to turn it into a kind of Labour morality tale. This I do remember, Sam, about the suffering of ordinary folk ignored by a cold-hearted British establishment. So there was real commitment here. What has gone so far awry that this bill, as you point out, is having to be pulled in this way that is just highlighting the failures?
I think that there may never actually be a landing zone for this law that satisfies all the different stakeholders that you need. Look, you may not be interested in the detail of the Hillsborough Law. It's quite a niche issue which animates some, but I think is largely still a subject that a lot of people in Westminster are unaware of. But it has become a lightning rod for the issue of whether Keir Starmer really can make sensible political choices, whether he can find smart compromises, and whether he can manage rebellions. And at the moment, he's not really passing any of those three tests. To me, the whole Hillsborough Law saga puts in neon lights the challenge this government is and has with complex policy. And also, and to some people actually around Starmer, it's a sorry tale of how the Prime Minister personally runs too fast to make promises he can't keep, and then panics and then back downs. If they continue to mess up on this, it is not clear that, given the support of people like Andy Burnham and others who really sort of wrote the first draft of this law, that this isn't a canary in a very big coal mine. So continue to watch it. The big picture chaos of Greenland is taking the focus of the below the line chaos of Keir Starmer's government. But we will come back to this. But the Hillsborough Law is very much an emblem of this government's inability to do prep on big things it promises before it got into government, or even when it's in government, and then crunching up against deadlines and panicking. It is a disaster for how this government is perceived in Westminster, and an advert for how it is struggling to make progress on its biggest promises.
Just a quick stitch from me on why this is also so important to Keir Starmer and has become such a huge headache across Whitehall. It's that in this bill, Sam, that you refer to, you have this commitment to a duty of candour, aimed, obviously, at preventing future cover-ups, as you say, but that has caused a massive backlash in the security services, particularly in MI5, but not only, because they're all saying, all three main services, MI6 and GCHQ, where does that leave the spooks, who you cannot be expected to have the same duty of candor as other public officials when they are working with secret sources. So I think this is a real problem for Keir Starmer, who's tried to make a very close relationship with the security services and their leadership. So watch this space, as you say. Just to move on across the spectrum of British politics, because it's pretty fizzy all round at the moment, Reform and the Tories have been vying for attention. Sensational few days on the right, with Robert Jenrick going off to Reform, the new sheriff in town, as the briefing document prepared by his own staff for the defection called him, which I think will make a few Reform sheriffs itch to reach for their Colt 45s.
Oh, God, yes. Just before you tell us the latest on Tory reform relations, I don't suppose you saw that social media post last night from Liz Truss. Let me quote it in full. Robert Jenrick may have joined Reform, but who is he getting his orders from? Trojan horse? Remarkable. It sounds like Liz Truss is parroting the latest leg of the Michael Gove is secretly controlling all the reform defectors from the Tories story that goes around every so often. Or perhaps it's just tit for tat after Robert Jenrick in the Times this morning says Kemi Badenoch doesn't have the balls and gumption to kick out Liz Truss.
I think we can all agree that Kemi Badenoch does not have balls. Anyway, moving on, there is plenty of conspiring to go into. Last night, Tory frontbencher Andrew Rossindell also defected, the bulldog-loving Romford MP, who was Reform UK even before Reform was a twinkle in Nigel Farage's eye, and there's a promise of a big Labour defection too, could the declaration on social media by Kate Hoey, Baroness Hoey, once a Labour minister, now an unaffiliated peer, that Rossindell was simply the best defector yet, provide a clue? I mean, that would be quite a scalp.
The government, the opposition, international affairs, all just a dreadful, dreadful mess this morning. We'll come back to the domestic end of stuff tomorrow, but there's only 20 minutes to do as much as we can. So let's get back to the big story of the morning, the one that you're at the heart of, Anne. Keir Starmer will use the dramatic press conference to reaffirm his commitment to NATO and repeat his Saturday statement that Trump's tariffs are completely wrong. I think what he's going to do when he stands up in Downing Street is to underline the sort of ongoing, enduring strength of the UK-US relationship, forged in World War II, built over decades, but then stress that allies can disagree. Okay, Peter Carl, the business secretary, held emergency meetings over the weekend with car and steel manufacturers who might be worst affected by the tariffs. This really matters because exports of goods to the US represent 2 to 3% of our economic output, and our growth is anemic. Now, just those tariffs alone wouldn't be enough to tip the UK into recession, says top economist Simon French, but they would cost £6 billion a year and hit the car industry worst. So what happens next diplomatically really matters at home economically. What do you think is going to unfold? And you're there amongst the US security detail and the MAGA crowd jostling at the US House in Davos, as you just told us. What's the sense?
Well, the first clue, Sam, is that Davos has gone full MAGA this year in terms of a different vibe, different level of presence of the Trump team. The entourage has got Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who's really holding court in that USA house that I described earlier, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, Jameson Greer, the big trade guy, Energy Secretary Chris Wright, and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, that duo who are the special envoys to the Middle East, Ukraine, and practically everything else. Now, what's interesting, if you look at that list of people, there are already quite a lot of different wings of MAGA and views around Donald Trump represented there. So when you say what's going to happen, I think this is also going to be a tug of war around the president for how far to stick or twist on Greenland. From that list, I would say, if you look at people like Lutnick and the trade rep, Greer, etc., they are people who tend to like to get to solutions. Scott Bessent keeps good relations, also has kept close relations with the UK embassy in Washington. So I would imagine that they would like to take the heat out of this for trade purposes. But let's not forget, you've got Witkoff and you've got Kushner there, who effectively, and Kushner is family, son-in-law to Trump, they are very emotionally close to what does Donald want? What does he want to go away from Davos with? So I think we could also see layers of, not I wouldn't say conflict, but competition, shall we say, for how to resolve this. I note that some of the absolute hardliners, Stephen Miller, etc., don't seem to be playing a role. So maybe Davos is the slightly softer diplomatic edge, but my goodness, there's quite a lot to diplomatize here. What do you reckon?
That's absolutely right. Look, that's a brilliant analysis, and that absolutely chimes with what some in the British government analyse the situation in the White House to be, because this spat over Greenland is in effect a byproduct of court politics, as you say. So there are two teams, the escalators and the de-escalators in the White House over this. And until Friday, I think the de-escalators, Marco Rubio and others, thought that they were sort of had the upper hand, and the Greenland question had moved into a bit of a process and it was all calming down. But on Saturday, the disruptors, and that's people like Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who was out and about even on Friday saying Greenland is essential for US national security to acquire, was saying that those deployments that we mentioned at the start of the podcast, which included that single military figure from the UK, were escalation. Trump was presented with the news of European deployments and saw it as, a defiance of US intent, and therefore responded as he responded. Right. The big question now is, do we get into a spiral of escalation, or do we in some way calm it down? Look, because those people, the escalators, want to reduce US military presence in Europe, cease as much bilateral defense activity, ramp up the sort of civilizational rhetoric. That's the goal of those people, and you can see it in some of their interviews over the weekend. So the question is, what path do we go at? And can you bring in some of the kind of amplify some of the calmer voices, get business at Davos to stress there is very little economic rationale from this and quite a lot of economic pain? That's where Davos comes into it. Can you use it to amplify the warnings about the bad consequences for the US itself from Donald Trump's actions while they're in the Swiss mountains?
I think what you've just said goes to the heart of what this Davos is turning into, which is kind of G7 in the snow test, both for the American team about what is the line that it fundamentally wants to hold, and where is it prepared to flex or to persuade Donald Trump, if he's in a good mood and likes the fondue, that actually, Europeans are a bit crazy, but in the end, what's the point of going into a full tariff conflict with them? That would be, if you like, some sort of a win. But the test for European leaders is, can they keep a unified front, given that they're nervously looking at their own national politics, threats, obviously, from those who don't particularly like the open global liberal trading order. So you've got Keir Starmer going frontal, as you pointed out there, Sam, by his mild standards, with that attack on using tariffs as a weapon to secure the expansionist move into Greenland. He said it's wrong. I mean, it's quite hard to get Keir Starmer to say things wrong, but he did say it this time. Emmanuel Macron went on full French outrage. No amount of intimidation would weaken opposition, he said, to the US's play on Greenland. Friedrich Merz, playing the tariffs, not the tariff wielder, he said that these levies undermine transatlantic relations and risked a downward spiral. If you notice, that's all very like third person, which is a German way of like getting out of conflicts you don't want to get into. Georgia Maloney, she went for a quieter line, but quite consistent, saying it was a mistake. So I think what we're seeing here is nuanced language. The question is what to do about it beyond that great old European game where we all try to say the same things, but we say it a bit differently.
Well, I think you outlined very clearly one of the possible responses, which is the kind of Macron response, which is to ramp up the rhetoric. And you've got the FT headline today: EU readies 93 billion euros of retaliatory tariffs. You can create your own big bazooka, as Macron was saying. You can make it clear, and there is a meeting of EU leaders on Thursday to decide whether to deploy it, that you're holding that in the backdrop and basically threaten Donald Trump back. And by the way, instantly, this is what the Lib Dems, Ed Davey, is very strongly pushing that we do as well: retaliatory tariffs on Trump. Come for his cronies and hit them where it's hurt. Scrap the NHS tax, as they would put the drug pricing reforms. So do that. So that's one option. But my sense, Anne, is the UK is very much not for that. The second route, like despite some of the tough language you mentioned, is, the one I think we're going to go down, sort of Jonathan Powell driven. So I think this is what Britain is going to do. It is going to try and change the way Trump sees those European deployments. After all, I don't think it was meant as a hostile act by the European nations sending people to the Arctic. It was meant to show that we're capable of protecting Greenland as well in the US national interest. So do you ask the US to join what's going on in Greenland? Do you maybe withdraw some of the troops that were sent over there? Do you use Davos to try and get people to speak up for the economic harm that these tariffs would do? All of that, I think. So I think the government will go down path number 2 because that's its instinct. And I think in government, they think that approach has worked before. And it might not be what the Lib Dems want and some hardline members of the PLP, even some ministers. But I think it is every bit of Keir Starmer's instinct to do that rather than turn the rhetoric into actually a real escalation.
And I think those looking for a Hugh Grant moment. Britain may be small and terrible, but we're really great. Go away, America. I don't think we're going to get that. I think you're right about that. I mean, and Jonathan Powell, formative there with Keir Starmer in shaping the reaction. But remember, also we've got Yvette Cooper, Foreign Secretary. She's rocking up this week, and she's been in the Arctic, so she's been really showing some presence on this. And so the tone of this is going to be funneled through her. It's possible that we'll get Keir Starmer as well, but it's going to be really interesting how that tone is worked out for Yvette Cooper to come. It's at the first time she's been in this role here at Davos. I notice also, just Playbook reporting in detail, Starmer did get his call with Trump yesterday in the middle of this. So that hotline is often out of order for European leaders at the moment. Your call is not important to us. Please don't hold. Keir Starmer still seems to get those calls. That will be important to him. And it suggests to me that you're right when you pressed press button 2 for not escalating, that this will be the preferred option of the UK. But let's see how the pressure works out on that. And then how do you then go out and do what we're going to hear from Keir Starmer this morning, but also stand up and say, I'm not just rolling over here. So he's got to really judge the tone in a quite difficult way here. A solidarity with the Euro brethren, but trying to keep on track that relationship with the US. There's one other little gremlin here. Of course, we're talking as if Donald Trump has a completely free hand here, Sam, but he doesn't entirely. The Supreme Court is set to hand down its ruling on whether these tariffs are constitutional at all. And you can see Donald Trump pushing back a lot on the possibility of that ruling going against him. 2 lower courts have ruled that they are not constitutional. So there's a very narrow escape hatch there for worried European leaders. It may just also play into the events of the week. So I pointed out.
I think not knowing the full picture is absolutely key. We don't know, and I know business leaders hope this, whether this is a taco move. Remember that? Trump always chickens out. 13 days is a long time in Trump land, and I know business figures hope that this quietly goes away. But moreover than that, we don't know the detail. So a 10% tariff on aluminium and steel, is that on top of the existing 10% tariff on aluminium and steel that Britain already pays? Or, does it all end up being 10% meshed together? We just don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Right, we're pretty much out of time, but given you're at the centre of everything, which must be quite weird, Anne, to be at the complete heart of international business and diplomacy, just give me one thing that gives me a sense of what it's like.
Oh, one thing would be try not to spend your own money on eating or drinking anything. And I speak as the woman who just signed over 40 euros for a barley soup last night and pleaded for the tap water with it. Now, this is really probably the most expensive place on the planet to do anything.
Many, many violins are currently playing. It's great to know. I look forward to the vignettes and the politics over the next 2-3 days. We will see you tomorrow morning. Thank you very much indeed.
I'll see you in my padded jacket.